Okay, let's start. All right, from the discussion that Mal gave in this piece, explaining contradiction and how contradiction works in the analysis of phenomenon that we would like to change or we aspire to change, whether we're talking about natural conditions, social conditions, etc. He went through a thorough study of what constitutes contradictions and what role contradictions play in analyzing, studying, and solving problems, material problems in the world that we live in. So to begin, I'd like to ask the comrades in general, and we can go around, how did you understand Mao's concept of the two-world outlook, or what were the two-world outlooks that he said develop mutually in opposition to each other?
Anybody want to go?
I can go. All power, comrade. This is Chris from New York. Mao lays out the two world outlooks as the bourgeois, metaphysical, idealist world outlook, and the dialectical materialist, proletarian world outlook.
Okay, that's exactly right. And can you give an explanation of what the metaphysical world outlook, how it's conceived and how it perceived the world, and where this ideal, where this outlook came from?
Anybody else besides Chris want to go? Or, I mean, even Chris?
Okay, sorry, I was waiting. So the metaphysical conception, like the metaphysical world outlook, is rooted in like religious thinking, idealist philosophy, that's been tied to ruling class ideology since the ancient society, and the revolution in human thought and knowledge that came out of the Industrial Revolution, when the contradictions of capitalism really started to intensify and sharpen, led to the development of dialectical materialism, and it separated itself from mechanical materialism and vulgar evolutionism. And it came out of the rise of the proletariat during the Industrial Revolution.
Anybody else want to chime in?
I did have a question about the term vulgar evolutionism.
Hold on, I heard you say you had a question about, and then you broke up a little bit and you stated what you said after that.
Like, what exactly does that mean? Was it a synonym for dialectics, or does it have a whole other meaning?
Did you get that, Rashid? I think she's asking about vulgar evolutionism.
It's like a definition for that.
I have one from the book that we mentioned earlier that I could type into the chat.
Will, what did she ask?
Yeah, hold on. The connection's not so good.
Hear what's being said because it's breaking up.
Yeah, it's breaking up pretty bad. I'm just trying to wait. She said she was asking about the term vulgar evolutionism.
Okay, I heard you say she. No.
And now you were breaking up when you said that. Vulgar evolutionism. Can you hear that?
Yeah, vulgar evolutionism. So she wants to know what vulgar evolutionism is?
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me? Am I breaking up?
You're coming in now.
Okay. Vulgar evolutionism is the same thing as the metaphysical world outlook. Okay. The metaphysical world outlook, which in the class context really came into its own under feudalism or society when you had monarchs and kings and peasants and serfs as opposing classes in the principal contradiction struggle with each other. Okay. Vulgar evolutionism is a view that the material world or contradictions may exist, but the world exists in a condition that's static. Things don't change. They just exchange places. Things essentially exist today that existed yesterday and existed before them. That there are no real qualitative changes in society. Like, they believe that the elements of capitalism and feudalism and existed before that, and slave-owning societies and existed before then, that there were no qualitative changes. There were no real changes in the nature and quality of society that caused society to evolve from one stage or to another stage. And that things never evolved into a higher stage of anything. It just, everything that exists now has always existed, and just the different things that exist have always been here. So it's really what gives the foundation to religious beliefs, that the world is ultimately the same as it always has been. There's nothing that people can do to struggle to change the conditions of the world, because there's nothing new. There's no really fundamental changes that have ever taken place or will take place in society. So people have no power to change society at all. Hold on one second.
I just want to add, if you look in the chat, I put the same definition kind of came out from the study companion as well, as lines up with what Rashid was saying.
Okay, I'm back. Go ahead. Somebody saying something?
I was just saying that I typed into the chat a definition I got from a book that's in front of me that lines up with your definition of vulgar evolutionism.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, just basically that the contradictions in the world have always existed. Yo! Alright, okay, hold on the phone, alright. Yeah, so basically the things have existed as they always have. And it gives rise to the view that we simply must accept things as they are, that there's nothing that can be done to change the qualitative conditions in a social environment. There's nothing that can be done to change natural phenomena. And, essentially that people are powerless to bring about, any type of change because things are as they always have been and are not, inclined to develop to a higher stage and that sort of thing. Hold on one second.
After hearing Rashid speak and maybe reading the definition I put, does that make sense a little bit more?
Yeah, that's clearer. I was just on my other screen. I gotta go back and forth between screens. So I'm taking a little bit of notes for myself. But thank you for that definition.
Hold on.
So is this?
You. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Ignacio. My bad.
So is this, in a sense, kind of like placing emphasis on the external contradictions, like in the text where it talks about placing emphasis on geography and things like that, rather than the internal contradictions within a thing being principle, and like in another sense, like instead of what's inside of the egg giving rise to the chicken, it being like the temperature outside of the egg, which gives rise to the chicken, sort of like following that line of thought.
I think that line.
Yeah, that very much explains, how the vulgar evolutionist outlook considers external things to be principal or external conditions to be principal to the development or evolution of conditions as opposed to the dialectical materialist or the dialectical outlook, which is that the internal conditions are what determine, material changes in a thing and qualitative change. As you gave the example of the chicken, the egg, and, the temperature is the external conditions with which the egg interacts, but the internal contradictions within the egg itself is what gives rise to the changes from the egg to a chicken, etc. And it understands that things exist and develop because of internal contradictions, but the internal contradictions develop in their relationship with the external environment or circumstances with which they interact. So yeah, that's the distinction between the vulgar materialist outlook and the dialectical materialist outlook, which came into its own with the development of capitalism and the development of the proletarian class, who by the higher stage of development of awareness or consciousness that evolved with the principal contradiction being between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, gave rise to a higher level of understanding of external contradictions, class struggle, and how these conditions give rise to changes in society, and how the proletariat itself can struggle against the social domination of the ruling class and change social conditions to a qualitatively different level. But it took the development of capitalist society for the proletariat or the working class or the laborers to develop and understanding of the laws of nature, the dialectical nature of how things exist and operate in unity and in struggle, for them to really understand how and that they could wage a struggle to change society from the internal contradictions that exist within the class society. So does this give everybody a general understanding of the two world outlooks, the metaphysical or the vulgar evolutionist versus the dialectical materialist world outlook?
You have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, how do you all understand the concept of the universality of contradiction?
So the universality of contradiction, in my opinion, I guess, references how essentially no matter what, everything is in a state of contradiction and at every level of development.
No, we're just waiting for Rashid to call back. Rashid can only call in 20-minute intervals.
Word.
But maybe you're a little crazy at the same time, so. Yeah, it's taking him a while to call back. I don't know what's going on. Garlic, what were you saying? I don't remember what you said. If you don't mind me asking right now.
Oh, wait, what I just said?
Yeah, about what was the question about understanding the universality of contradiction?
Yeah, I was saying that the universality of contradiction is the fact that there's a contradiction in everything, but also every developmental phase of everything.
Mm-hmm.
From beginning to end. I guess I don't know. I feel like I'd be like really short saying stuff.
No, I think that's it. It's like that second paragraph in that section. Okay, he's calling. All right, you're back.
Okay, so yeah, that's exactly right. That the universality of contradiction means that contradiction is absolute. It exists in everything, and there are two meanings. There are twofold meanings to the universality of contradiction. And one is that, as said, contradiction exists in all things. And the other is that the process or contradictions exist in the process of things developing from beginning to end. Like the entire evolution of a thing from its beginning until it goes out of existence, contradiction exists at all stages of its existence. So if you take anything like life and death, light and dark, heat and cold, up and down, inside, outside, everything that exists in a unity of contradiction. There's contradictions that permeate every level of existence, and if you understand the contradictions that exist throughout nature, the world, the universe, you will have a foundation for understanding the nature of things that exist, because you understand that which gives rise to motion, development, change, etc., is the interaction of contradictions in a thing and the contradictoriness of everything that exists. So really the concept is pretty simple. It's just that everything that exists as a unity of contradiction. There are mutually exclusive forces that give rise to everything. So does that give everybody a simple but clear understanding of what the universality of contradiction is? Okay, so anybody that has an idea or would like to give an answer, what is the particularity of contradiction as opposed to the universality of contradiction?
The particularity of contradiction is which differentiates one contradiction from another.
Anybody else want to chime in before I unmute?
Yes, that basically gives an idea of the particularity of contradiction. But to go a bit deeper and further, the particularity of the contradiction is what distinguishes, as you said, one thing from another. But to understand the difference between, say, one form of matter and another, say between a mouse and say a piece of plywood, you would investigate the internal contradictions that give rise to its existence and the internal contradictions that struggle with and exist in unity within that particular form of matter or that particular phenomenon to understand what makes it different from another form of matter. Why does the piece of wood evolve as it does from, the ground and the various things that feed it and develop it, cause it to grow into what it becomes, and what the contradictions within that thing distinguish it from, say, the development and existence of the rat or the animal or whatever else you may be observing. So what you would do is you would study the internal contradictions of the given phenomenon or the given condition or what have you. And by doing so, you would learn what characteristics it has internal to it that distinguish it from another phenomenon or another condition and its own internal characteristics. So the particular characteristics of that given thing is what determines the particularity of its own contradiction as against other different contradictions that may exist, outside of it, but with which it may also interact. So yeah, that's how you distinguish between the universality of contradiction that just generally exists throughout all existence at all levels of existence, even material existence, society, etc. And then the particularity, which is taking the study of contradictions to a more specific level where you study actual conditions, things, ideas, and the contradictions that distinguish that particular thing from another thing or that particular phenomenon or condition from another phenomenon or condition. So does that give everybody a general understanding of what the universality of contradiction is versus the particularity of a contradiction and how those two are distinguished from each other?
Could I run an example by you to see if that exemplifies the discussion?
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to do that anyways, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no, you go ahead.
No. You started.
Damn. All right. Well, I was gonna say like, so is this kind of like the universality of contradiction, is kind of, and the particularity of contradiction is kind of like when the Soviet Union was trying to dictate to Mao what he needed to do in the Chinese Revolution by arbitrarily applying the thesis of like a universal contradiction, which was correct, but without investigation into the particularities that were pertinent to China specifically. And when Mao rebelled against this mechanical analysis and constituted his own program and whatnot, and not to be reductionist and say Mao did everything, but the Chinese, and would that be kind of like an example of how they devoted a lot of study into the particularity of the Chinese contradictions, as opposed to becoming mechanical and more idealist and just focusing on the universality of contradictions?
Yeah, that's a good example. But you would to give it, I guess, a clearer illustration of people's minds how they would distinguish the universality of contradiction as the Soviet Union may have interpreted it versus the particularity of the Chinese as applying it to specifically Chinese society. Okay, the Soviet analysis, for example, reduced the class struggle to, the bourgeois and the proletariat. And the peasantry as only the ally of the proletariat in the struggle against capitalist domination. So the Soviet Union applied that general universal principle of capitalism or capitalist class struggle to the fight against capitalist encroachment and capitalist development and domination in what became the Soviet Union. Russia initially being the Soviet Union. Okay, so they applied a universal principle of revolutionary class struggles. And of course, there was the effort by Stalin and those who followed Stalin in China, Wang Ming and Li Lisan, to apply that same general approach to the revolution in China, as you pointed out. And Mao said, okay, well, in China, we don't have a large proletariat. We are predominantly a peasant society. We are a semi-feudal, semi-colonial society. So the largest class or the largest laboring class in China is the peasantry. And the cities are small. The development of the proletariat is small relative to the larger, the larger society that is China. So if we're going to engage in a struggle that sweeps the entire country, we're going to have to mobilize the peasantry to become the main force of revolution as opposed to the proletariat. So as you pointed out, Mao made an adjustment in the general class struggle or class line that was generally applied, from the Marxist perspective of the Soviet Union. And he looked at the particular conditions of China, which there was not a large proletariat in China. There wasn't a large national bourgeoisie in China. So he had to work with the conditions that they had and devise a strategy that related to the actual specifics of China, the contradictions in Chinese society, to develop the strategy for the revolutionary struggle there, which was to mobilize the peasantry and define the ways of organizing the peasantry so that they would become proletarianized and class conscious and able to wrap their minds around a struggle for national liberation under the political line of the proletariat or revolutionary proletariat. So yes, that's a very good example of how you distinguish the particularity of a contradiction in a specific place from a general contradiction, but also the distinction between the particularity of contradictions that existed in the Soviet Union and that were relative to the struggle in the Soviet Union versus the particularity of the contradictions that existed in China, and how focusing on and using the specific contradictions of each of those societies determined what was the most effective way to organize your revolutionary struggle there. And the same thing that we have to do in the conditions we're struggling under. We have to take the particular conditions that we're struggling. We can't just imitate what they did in Russia. We can't just imitate what they did in China. we have to take and study the actual class relations in the society we live in, the contradictions within those class relations, and the oppressive system as it exists now, and in the conditions of the society that we're fighting against. And we have to develop and mold our revolutionary strategy around the specific contradiction or the particular contradiction that exists here. So does that give an illustration to everybody based on what the comrade Egan just gave us a really good example? But does that kind of clarify for everybody the distinction between particularity and the universality of contradictions, how we distinguish between particular contradictions in different places?
Yeah, I just want to encourage if folks don't know, yeah, let's continue asking questions until we're clear on this.
Okay, if comrades if you generally don't know these, or you can't really wrap your mind around these distinctions or these concepts, it's important that you make this known so that we can work through this and you develop the most clarity that you can, because these concepts are going to form the foundation of how we think and how we develop revolutionary strategy and how we apply our thinking to solving and changing, problems and conditions in the world that we are fighting and struggling to change. So if comrades don't understand these concepts and these principles, speak up and let me know, and we'll build and try to see if we can flesh out a clearer understanding and work you through these concepts so that you can, get a deeper grasp of them.
Could I propose something else?
Yeah.
Would it be correct to say that the particularity of the contradictions that exist within the reactionary intercommunalist core here call for a higher degree of unity with the lumpen proletariat and the proletariat, which is something qualitatively different than had been experienced in feudal and semi-feudal revolutions in the past, like in Russia and China? So would that be a correct statement? And if so, what are some of the particularities or consequences of that, in particular when forming strategy, revolutionary strategy here, which is definitive from these other processes which have taken place throughout history?
Yes, that is an accurate assessment. The contradictions, the particularities of contradictions in society under reactionary intercommunalism, which is the condition under which we live today under what is also called neoliberalism, is qualitatively different than the internal or particular contradictions of China during the Chinese Revolution, under Russia during the Russian Revolution. And the implications of that is, as you pointed out, the need for a higher level and a different sort of class unity or class alliance between the proletariat and the lumpen and the permanently unemployed proletariat and the marginalized, as opposed to China, where the major alliance was between the peasantry and the emerging proletariat, and the contradiction in Russia between the proletariat as the predominant class and the remnants of, or the rural elements of the peasantry, which both were pretty large and developed classes in Russia. So in existing society under reactionary intercommunalism, because of the advances in technology, automation, there's been a large exclusion of what were established workers or secure workers from productive employment or from secure employment, so that now masses of people have been pushed out of employment. They can't find gainful employment or secure employment, and it's not the typical army of unemployed workers that Marx, analyzed as people who were systematically pushed out of employment and served as a pool of labor from which the bourgeoisie could continuously draw on and drive down the cost of labor or the value of labor. This is an era in which there's a permanently unemployed sector, and a huge one, where people have just been pushed totally out of employment and can't find work, or can only find very minuscule and isolated opportunities in small pockets of employment. And the vast majority are unemployable and have become lumpen because of their pursuit of material gain or survival through hustling and preying on other members of their own class and other layers of society, exploitation, competition, etc. is generally being predatory. So the conditions that exist now under revolutionary communalism, under existing conditions, is one where we have to proletarianize this layer of society because of their vast numbers and because of their inherently reactionary nature. And therefore, they're being easy to appeal to and manipulate by the bourgeoisie to become agents of reaction to help to advance the interests and the objectives of the bourgeoisie, including serving as shopkeepers against the revolutionary element and the proletariat. So we have to develop a strategy, which is what we envision in the Panther movement and Pantherism, whereby we can proletarianize this huge segment of reactionary non-workers and develop their consciousness, their willingness and understanding of need to join the revolution to change conditions and fight to ultimately overthrow the capitalist imperialist system or reactionary communalism. So yes, that's a very accurate analysis of the difference in the particulars of the societies under which other revolutions have been waged and the society in which we are now waging a struggle to try to change its social conditions in a revolutionary way, and the role of the class.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The necessary class alliances that we must make in today's society versus in the societies in other places and other times when revolutions were fought and struggled for. So does that help illustrate and give comrades a good insight into the differences between the universality and the particular other contradictions and distinguishing between the particular contradictions in different societies in this particular case and the society that we are struggling in now? Okay, I'll take the silence here.
Thank you for using GTL.
Comrades, on that last question, Rashid was answering how, this is a question, he was answering how the local organizing should kind of go based off of the particularity of the contradictions here. Is that correct? Or did I misunderstand?
Yeah, I think that's a general way to sum up what he just said. I'd agree with that.
Thanks.
Would you agree with if we were to say, like, in much similar ways that Mao worked to revolutionize and proletarianize the peasantry in China during their semi-feudal revolution, under our reactionary intercommunalist struggle, we should also revolutionize and proletarianize the lumpen proletariat in similar but distinctive ways. And the 10-point program being one of the methods with which we do that.
A question there would be, like, in the situation of the agrarian wars and the peasants in China, they had the issue of land, and that was kind of like the material basis of, you know, their revolutions. And I wonder, like, what would act in the same way here? Would there need to be something that acted in the same way here to mobilize the proletariat or the lumpen proletariat?
I got Rashid back. Ignacio, did you want to repeat your question or just continue?
Sure, and I think Comrade Chris also had a question too. Did you want to go first, Comrade?
No, Comrade. My question kind of just follows up on your question, so I can follow up after.
Oh, okay. So repeating the question, in the similarity between what Mao and the Chinese communists did to revolutionize and proletarianize the peasantry in their semi-feudal revolution, today in our revolutionary into communalist revolution, we should revolutionize and proletarianize the lumpen proletariat, and the 10-point program kind of being with one of the ways principally that we do that. And then Comrade Chris added on to that.
Yes, it gives you a foundational approach to the beginning stages of our struggle to revolutionize reactionary intercommunalism and to bring the struggle or the consciousness of the need for change to a generally non-revolutionary class. The oppression, the sufferings that they are subjected to, that we can easily wrap their minds around needing to change, and then incorporate to the revolutionary proletarian line, which is struggle for, the class struggle, which is the struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. So yeah, the 10-point program operates to give by the beginnings of a class consciousness program that will give them the sense of the need and the understanding of the struggle against the oppressive class, and organize them around programs that we can develop in them the incentives of cooperation, self-sufficiency, to develop the productive forces within generally non-proletarian social grouping, whereby they can provide basic needs, they can develop dual power and merge or integrate that struggle within the class struggle led by the proletariat, and therefore become an ally and comrades to the proletariat in this revolutionary struggle. And as you said, they would be proletarianized like the peasantry were proletarianized through the development of the rural mass bases and that sort of thing in China under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, the proletarian line that they brought to the peasants.
Chris, did you want to chime in, or should we just continue?
My question was related to the land and the peasant situation in China, but your answer regarding how the Serve the People programs and the New African Black Panther Party will act to proletarianize the lumpen and then form unity with the proletariat based off of that kind of answers that question.
All right. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next subject, which would be the principal contradiction and the principal aspect of a contradiction. So, in understanding the universality of contradiction, or just contradictions in general, as forming the basis of all existence, how do we understand the principal contradiction within a given thing or given phenomenon or a given society? What is the principal contradiction?
The principal contradiction would be like the main aspect of the current situation. Like right now, the principal contradiction would be the class antagonism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and everything else is secondary.
Okay. Yes, and let me add to that a little bit. The principal contradiction, which is, as you gave in capitalism, or the principal contradiction is anything is the two contradictory forces that form the very core of the thing's existence. These are the contradictions without which this thing could not exist. If one aspect of it would eliminate the whole contradiction, the whole relationship that they combine and struggle against each other to form, say in capitalist society. In capitalism, the principal contradiction is the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. If you somehow destroyed the bourgeoisie, there would be no capitalism. If you somehow destroy the proletariat, there would be no capitalism. So these are the two fundamental forces that exist at the essence of capitalist society. And there's only one principal contradiction. And it's that one contradiction of existing anything that forms the core of the existence of the relationship that they combine into. That without them existing in struggle and unity and in contradiction with each other, the thing they combine into would cease to exist, which, as said under capitalism, is the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Without both of those classes existing in contradiction to each other, you could not have capitalism. So, let me see if I can give another very simple and general example. Say in life, in the organic development of human life, there are two principal contradictions that exist. Without one or the other, human life could not exist. And that would be the interaction between man and woman, male and female. If you eliminated woman, you would have no human being. If you eliminated man, you would have no. If you eliminated the two necessary operative principal contradictions or principal components that give birth to or give life to the entire contradiction that forms humanity, then humanity would cease to exist. So it's that principal contradiction that continues to struggle against each other. You have a constant struggle between the two polar opposites that are the things that give birth to and allows the continuation of life for human beings at this stage of evolution. Now, evolution may change at some point, and a qualitative leap takes place where these two elements no longer are necessary for human survival. You may develop a form of humanity that doesn't need two polar gender forces in order to create and continue its evolution and existence. But as it stands now, without these two polar opposites existing in unity and struggle, changing places, giving birth to each other, you would not have humanity. So does that give an idea of how the principal contradiction exists within a given thing, and that it forms the two polar opposites that come together in unity and struggle with each other to form a given thing, without which that thing could not exist?
Yeah, that makes
Did you say something? I didn't hear that.
I just said that made sense.
We just had a local collective PE session, and we're talking about dialectical materialism as well. And one of the simple examples I tried to use was a quarter, 25 cents quarter, and was asking the question, is a quarter tails or heads? And I was thinking about that again as Rashid was speaking, because I think it's a very, 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 very simple way of looking at how both sides of the quarter give the quarter its identity, that shows that, we all grew up heads or tails with a quarter or whatever. But anyways, that's a very simple example that I was thinking about.
Okay, there's the identity that we infuse into the quarter, yeah. But if that was that was a universal, if that was something that were a convergence of opposites, then you would have to show how those two opposites exist in competition with each other, how they form the essence of what constitutes that thing, and how they exist in struggle as well as unity with each other to form the identity or the existence of that thing. Not to disagree with the example, but you would have to further and say, okay, it's heads and tails, what gives the quarter's very existence? And if you eliminate the facial side of the coin or the back side of the coin, you eliminate the coin as a coin or as a quarter. You follow me?
Oh yeah. No. So when we discussed this, that's kind of what we got into, and I was just bringing that up as a example, not to go deep into it, but no, I agree, and that's So the question was what gives the quarter its identity, right? And what happens if you do remove one side or the other or both sides? But I mean, you could actually go deeper with dialectical materialism, because it's also the material that it's made out of, right? And we also brought up another example. What is the opposite of a fork? And obviously everyone's like spoon, but we dissected it by saying, well, the reason that the fork is a fork is because all of these materials, just like going back to what Comrade Garlic was saying, that one of the universality of contradiction is going from the beginning to the end, right? The fork was never always a fork. It was some type of other material. It's going through this developmental process from beginning to end. And if the fork were to deteriorate, it would suddenly make a qualitative leap to where it is no longer a fork. It is something completely different, right? And I feel like we could use that as that's another kind of going outside of this section of the principal contradiction. But yeah.
All right. So, given these concepts of what forms the principal contradiction within a given thing or phenomenon, what then is the principal aspect of a contradiction?
So if there's two, oh my bad. Go ahead.
Actually, you can go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, if there's two opposing forces within a thing, one of the forces or the aspect has to be a predominant force. And that predominant force makes up the principal aspect of the contradiction. So, and that principal aspect of the contradiction defines that contradiction. I guess, if we're using bourgeoisie and proletariat, if the bourgeoisie is the principal aspect of a contradiction, it's the capitalist society, right? But if the proletariat is the principal aspect, it's in socialist transition, to kind of just sum that up.
Exactly right. And that's a perfect example. Yeah. Okay, so does everybody understand that the principal aspect of the contradiction is simply understanding the principal contradiction and which aspect of the principal contradiction, which of those two polar forces that are in struggle with each other and unity with each other is in a dominant position. So by saying the bourgeoisie controls society, controls the military, the cultural institutions, the political institutions, the historical narrative of society, etc., then the bourgeoisie dominates society, which, as the comrade said, is capitalism. But when the proletariat has gained a dominant position, and the proletarian class has military control of the political institutions, cultural institutions, the historical expression and analysis of society, etc., then the proletariat is in the dominant position and therefore is the principal aspect of the contradiction. So, with that, what then is the identity and the struggle of these aspects of a contradiction?
Could you repeat that?
Okay, what is the identity or the unity and the struggle of the two principal aspects of a contradiction?
I'll give it a try. So the identity and struggle of the aspects of a contradiction could be understood as that the existence of these two aspects or two forces are of a bigger whole, and then also that both of these aspects turn into each other, into its opposite.
Okay. Yes, that's the identity or the unity. And then you also have the struggle. But with the example that we gave of capitalism and the proletariat, identity and in struggle with each other. They transform into each other, and they also struggle against each other. So they exist in a mutually contradictory but also a mutual complementary relationship. To give an example, in the struggle for production, you have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat constantly struggling against each other for domination. The proletariat, in those times when the oppressions or the exploitation of the bourgeoisie are particularly sharp, when you have under their conservative policies, when they're only thinking about profit at the expense of just grinding the working class.
You have 1 minute remaining.
To extract as much value from their labor as possible, then the proletariat will fight back. They will struggle against that. And they will rise up. They will become conscious of the need to wage a struggle to change their conditions, to gain reforms to raise wages, to develop better work conditions, that sort of thing. This is the beginning stages of the struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. But they also mutually exchange positions and power in their struggle, where the proletariat can become the dominant class in some stages, and the bourgeoisie will transform into the position of taking the dominant position, which is what you had during the revolution. Then, say in China and the Soviet Union, the proletariat gained state power and was able to repress the bourgeoisie and became the dominant force. So they switched positions. They transformed from the dominant ruling class.
Thank you for using GTL.
So, what's the principal aspect of a contradiction of a quarter?
The principal aspect of the contradiction of a quarter.
Yep.
I don't know, dude. It'd be like the middle of the quarter.
Its shape.
The amount of metal in the quarter.
Ooh. Good one. Well,
I don't know. I was genuinely asking. I don't know. I have an idea of it, but hold on. He's calling back. Let me merge.
okay.
All right, Rashid, you're back.
Okay. Oh, I heard you all were talking. I mean, were you all commenting on what we were just talking about, or?
No, I brought up the quarter thing and was asking what the principal aspect of a quarter might be.
Okay, in order to come up with that, you'd have to understand or determine what is the principal contradiction in the quarter.
That's true.
What
And
is the contradiction that makes the quarter a quarter?
Would that be like the value of the quarter put onto it, but also like the value of the metals used in the quarter? Would that be the contradiction of the quarter?
Well, I think it would depend on the quarter and the conditions that the quarter is in. You know, if it's like a old ass quarter and like, you know, the face, the tails have been like rubbed off, then maybe I don't know, this is.
Are you looking at the social? Are you looking at the social value of the quarter? Are you looking at it from the standpoint of physics? The chemistry of the quarter, what component of the quarter, or how are you looking at the quarter, and in what context would determine what its principal contradiction is? Are you just looking at it as something of value within a particular economic system that gives its identity, or are you looking at the fusion of metals that make it into what it is as a chemical or an elemental combination of forces? How are you looking at the quarter to define what the quarter is?
That's a good one. So if let's say we're using like the physical component of a quarter, and I'm trying to, I don't know, just for some dumb reason, hold something, a lot of weight up with that quarter. Like I'm stacking a lot of weight on that quarter, right? And then the principal contradiction in that situation would be like how much weight can that quarter withstand, right?
before it crumbles. Or
Yeah.
before it crumbles.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess you're looking at the quarter as something different than a coin of material value. You're looking at it for its strength in being able to withstand a certain level of pressure. So what would be the principal contradiction within that gives it its strength? And at what point does that contradiction break down its strength? What is the principal contradiction? And at what stage is what aspect of that contradiction primary and or principal or the principal aspect, and which one is the non-principal aspect?
Well, I think that goes into a point that I don't think we've covered yet, is that principal contradictions can change according to different conditions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And again, it depends on what usage or what context in which you're looking at that quarter. So I'm thinking if you're looking at it as a quarter by definition is a coin that has a particular value as far as wealth is concerned. That if you're looking at it as something other than a quarter per se, then you're looking at it as a metal, say a metal for its value as the strength, the alloy, how it can be used for different, I guess, metallurgical uses. Like you said, holding something up or as an alloy in a particular machine or something like that.
So like, oh, sorry, girl.
No, Ignacio, just go ahead.
You,
Let's just have Ignacio speak up real quick.
I was gonna say, like, wouldn't be attributing the essence of a quarter to its value, from like an economical perspective, be more subjective as opposed to addressing the essence of the quarter as being comprised of basically like zinc and copper, and that being a more definitive property because that's objectively like elements as opposed to an economy which is relative to social and other, conditions.
Exactly. And that was the point I was making. Are you looking at it from the objective standpoint, which is the chemical basis of it, which is when you go into analyzing the elements that go into its composition, nickel, ferrous or iron, copper, whatever goes into it as an alloy, or are you looking at it for its social value that is imposed on it within a monetary system, which is, as you said, subjective, is relative, and it can change given, how it's perceived and treated within the monetary system. But its objective characteristics are its metallurgical properties, which is where you will come to what the principal contradiction is, which are what are the principal components that make this metal what it is, that without which it would qualitatively change or it could be destroyed. So that would be the genuine principal contradiction. What is the contradiction that makes this alloy, makes this elemental compound into what it actually is? And what could destroy it or what could cause it to change from one qualitative level to another?
I just want to say I really appreciate this exercise because it helps think about it in a dialectical way.
But actually, this is how you think. You apply dialectical materialism. It's a scientific analysis to understand what are the core components of anything that comes under your consideration, and that you're seeking to change or understand and to be able to apply or understand the laws of nature that surround it and how to move it into the direction that you desire to bring about the change you desire. So this is what dialectical materialism is. It's mastering how to see something, understand what is the principal contradiction that gives it its very existence, and how you can change or move or maneuver within the laws of its structure or within the laws of nature or existence, those specific contradictions, so that one aspect, you can move one aspect into a dominant position or the other aspect into a dominant position, or ultimately cause those aspects to, one aspect to become so dominant that it ultimately destroys the other aspect and you eliminate that condition altogether. And that is what we struggle to do with capitalism. We struggle to understand, or by having understood the principal contradiction, how to ally forces so that we move the proletariat until it becomes so dominant that it's able to overthrow the bourgeoisie and then ultimately eliminate the bourgeoisie, which we understand through, it's going to take an economic struggle, a military struggle, and finally, to purge all the remnants of the thinking and values of the bourgeoisie, a cultural struggle. And once you have totally eliminated the economic, the military, the historical, the cultural conditions that have given the bourgeoisie life, then you would destroy the whole capitalist system. You would destroy the whole class society. And that's when you will have communism, which is why it has to be on a world scale, because you would have to eliminate the bourgeoisie and all remnants of bourgeois society and class society once and for all. And that can't be done in isolated areas. It has to be done on a global scale, because you would have to eliminate all potential conditions that would regenerate class society and the proletariat and bourgeois class. Follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is the role of antagonist? Go ahead.
Could I ask a question concerning the idea of a principal contradiction? And we should, another idea of the principal contradiction is that within anything, or within the United States, for example, there exists many contradictions, but there's always one principal leading contradiction. And one of the things that Mao writes about is that all of the secondary or non-principal contradictions cannot be resolved until the principal contradiction is resolved. That's correct, right? Before I move on.
Well, actually, there are all types of secondary contradictions that can rise and fall within a general condition. So secondary contradictions are not necessarily predicated on the principal contradiction. That's just like under capitalism. You can have colonialism, you can have neo-colonialism, you can have aspects of slavery. You can eliminate aspects of slavery and still have capitalism. You can have different forms of economic exploitation, different types of technologies that evolve with their own inherent contradictions that are secondary to capitalism itself. And they can rise and they can be destroyed. They can appear and disappear. So secondary contradictions are not essential or do not rise and fall necessarily with the principal contradictions, because there are so many multitudes of non-principal contradictions that arise and fall within the existence of any given situation or any given condition in capitalist society. For example, you have multitudes of contradictions that have existed that don't exist anymore. And they exist by nature of the capitalist class conditions, but their existence was not dependent upon, per se, the principal contradiction. They could exist and they could also be destroyed in the process of struggling pro or con within the capitalist system. You follow me?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But to go, and I understand and I agree, but are there contradictions that depend on the principal contradiction? And for instance, we live in a class-based society and class is principle, but there's also, say, like racism and sexism is like a huge contradiction. And therefore, like, I guess I could only pose it as a question: can racism be resolved under while the capitalist contradictions exist, or
I mean,
sexism?
I don't
Hold
think
on,
so.
hold on. Garlic, you want to go?
I personally, in that specific thing that you brought forth, well, I think stuff like since racism was kind of a thing that was brought up by capitalism to make sense of it, like to me, racism is a secondary contradiction, and so to even address that, we'd have to address the primary contradiction, which is capitalism first, before we could be able to diminish the things like racism, misogyny, etc.
Okay, I think racism, sexism, those types of contradictions are so fundamental a component of the principal class contradiction and bolstering the power and domination of the bourgeoisie as a principal aspect of a contradiction, of the principal contradiction, that no, they cannot be total so long as you still have class society. Because if we understand the history of the development of capitalism, capitalism arose with racism being one of the fundamental strategies that the bourgeoisie used to polarize the oppressed as against itself, to play them against each other and to make them capable of being dominated. If we go back to the old, say for example, we go back to old slave system and colonialism and the exploitation of or the development of the primitive mode or the primitive mode of production that gave rise to capitalism. A component part of the development of these older forms of production and surplus that created the foundation for the development of capitalism rose with racism, rose with polarizing one society of people against another society of people by teaching one society of people, okay, you have an entitlement to rule over this people. And they did that in order to create a large sector or a large population that could police another super exploited sector, which was what came to maturity under imperialism, and therefore bolster and stabilize the power of the bourgeoisie over all of society. So it's such a component part of the domination of the bourgeoisie and the strategy that it uses to maintain its hegemony or to maintain its position as a principal aspect of the principal contradiction, that you would not be able to thoroughly eradicate racism and sexism until you have eradicated class society. And it's so deeply ingrained in the culture of class society that part of the cultural revolution that would have to be waged even under socialism when the proletariat has gained power, it's so necessary to dig deep into the elements or the remnants of bourgeois culture, which still would propagate the ideas of racism, sexism, and just in general polarizing the masses, that it would have to ultimately take communism to really purge these types of polarizing and these types of divisive values that have been so deeply ingrained in society that form such an elemental part of class society without being the principal contradiction itself.
Could I add something here from my analysis to kind of tag onto this to see if it's correct?
Yes.
So like I look at it as more like a matter of like quantitative and qualitative, and like evolution and revolution. And that's terminology coming a lot out of like reading Dialectical and Historical Materialism by Stalin. But the point being, like, we can have quantitative changes in the conditions, like we had at the beginning of the United States, a lot of indentured servitude. And then after the Bacon's Rebellion, we had more outright slavery. And over the course of time, slavery wasn't necessarily abolished, but it took a different form. So the same goes for sexism. And while women may have different rights today, we could say better situations than they did back at the early like Puritan like times. They're still fundamentally oppressed in an intersectional way, and they experience sexism. And like MOD and you have been saying, it's kind of like there's quantitative changes which can occur, and perhaps even in some situations make life more easy or slightly better, but it's like crumbs from the table. It's not a qualitative leap. It's not a revolution, it's an evolution. So fundamentally, especially when we take into account the cultural aspect, it's a matter of we could spend all of our energy fighting just racism or just sexism, but without addressing the principal contradiction, we're going to only yield quantitative changes or evolutionary changes that only transform the actual form of oppression and racism and sexism. So it won't be eradicated, but it will be transformed into a new way. If that makes sense, I want to see if that like kind of analysis is correct or if it's incorrect.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. The phone's here to hang up. Let me call right now.
Thank you for using GTL.
While we wait, I just want to do a time check. It's 8:30. We've been on for about an hour and a half. To respect people's time, do we need to end it now or very soon, or can we maybe go till 9 o'clock? What do y'all think? Or midnight?
I'm probably going to have to bounce in about 15 minutes, but I just want to quickly say that what Comrade Ignacio was saying made me think about the piece on revolutionary women's liberation versus feminism and why it's important to make that clear demarcation because of the role that feminism has played in evolutionizing the form of women's oppression, specifically to meet the material needs of petty bourgeois women instead of revolutionizing women's oppression to meet the needs of oppressed women. So thanks for your comments, Ignacio.
Gracias, Cam.
Yeah, good point. I like that. Okay, let's see if we could do another 10 or 15 minutes.
I'm good with that.
I'm about to merge. 1 second. Comrade Rashid. What the hell? I don't know. I merged it, but I'm not hearing anything. Oh, damn it. All right, he's calling in again. Oh my God, it did it again. Hello? So he calls in and like a second after I hear the background noise, I merge. I'm gonna have to end the call. Hold on. Man, I don't know. I'm having some technical difficulties over here, y'all.
It won't let you merge anymore.
All right, one more. He's calling again. One more time. Let's see.
Hello, this is a prepaid call from.
Give me a second. I gotta call in. All right, he's back. Sorry for all that. Rashid, we're gonna go about 10 more minutes to respect people's time.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I think that's a real good example you gave, Comrade Iggy. If we look at it from this standpoint, okay, racism and sexism evolved at a certain stage of class society. Let's take sexism, for example, and to show you why, without focusing on the principal contradiction, which is class struggle, the struggle against sexism would never succeed in liberating women from oppression. Okay, the oppression and exploitation of women began with a particular form of class society, which is slave owner society. So class society gave birth to the oppression of women. If we go back to the pre-class societies where we had primitive communalism, where women had sexual freedom and they were the matriarchs, they were the clan mothers around who their particular clans were organized. They could freely intermarry with whomever they chose. There was the clan organized around the mother based on relatives. There were the uncles, the aunts, the children, the brothers, etc. They formed a part of the matriarchal clan. And one clan could be married to a whole nother clan. All the women of one clan and all the men of one clan could be generally married to all the women and men of another clan, and they enjoyed sexual freedom. There was no formal marriage, which is a feudalist concept. There was no monogamy. There was none of that sort of thing. And the mother or the matron was seen to be the highest and most respected element of society. Okay, when you had the development of village societies, when you had pastoralism evolve, when you went into slave-owning societies where people started to hoard surplus wealth or hoard surplus production, and they wanted to hand down surplus property from one generation to the next. This required the domination of men for the purpose of inheritance. Because if you didn't know who your father was, then you could not inherit or you could not pass down wealth that was held in surplus by a dominant male member of society like a chief. So what they did was they took away women's sexual freedom, and the men in turn had sexual freedom, but the women became the wives, or they became the required partners of the man, so that the man knew who his heirs were, who was his firstborn male child, who would receive or inherit his power, his political power, which was who would become the chief, the next chief, and who would inherit the social wealth or the wealth of his household or his grouping. So this is why the role of women as the predominant social mover or the predominant leader in society was suppressed, and men came to dominate society. The whole thing was based on class and the inheritance of wealth or property. Property relations is what created the condition of oppressing women, so that when the male warrior, the male chief became the dominant force, they would raid other villages or raid other societies. They would kill the men, and they would capture the women and children as slaves. So this was another component of the domination and the oppression of women. Women became the sexual object, the objects of oppression and exploitation, domination by the male or the dominant male members of society. And the men could take the captured women as slaves in different households. Of course, it was a different type of slavery. The women could ultimately marry into the household and become the mother or the wife of the male whose household they became a slave of. So it wasn't the type of slavery that we had under, the capitalist slash feudalist slash slave on the form of slavery that evolved here in the Western Hemisphere. But from there you had feudal society, which was where monogamous marriage came into its own, where the monarchs, they married chiefly into the family in order to preserve the bloodline that they claimed they had, was ordained by God or whatever deity they worshiped, which was always typically a monotheistic religion. So they patterned the concept of God after the king. All the traits, the values, the ideas of what formed the king, they imposed and molded the idea of God around that concept. And that's why you have like the jealous God of the Old Testament. He called himself a Lord and a king, and he ruled over the people, as a sole ruler, and was jealous of any other you worshiping or you giving obeisance or paying tribute to any other God. They basically made the whole concept of God as the concept of the king. So they made God in man's image as opposed to God making man in his own image. And the whole concept was a male authority figure who dominated everybody else and subordinated women. And as I said, feudalist marriage came into the equation in order to securely possess and control the wealth that was passed down from the monarch to his firstborn male child. And so he would know who his heir was and and kept his bloodline so-called pure by the passage of, the bloodline through the male, the next male child. And this is what inhered in the evolution of capitalism. But in each stage, women's resistance against the oppressive conditions of patriarchy or male domination and males joining in the struggle against paternalism and patriarchy gave women a higher stage of freedom, or technically freedom, in each stage of society as it evolved from feudalism to capitalism. Under capitalism, women gained more rights. There was more political freedom. There was more social freedom. And now, especially amongst the proletariat, there's more sexual freedom. There's more relational freedom. And the old forms of non-binary social categories and et cetera have come back into their own, or start to come back into their own as they existed under the old communal society. Because as we know, if we study communal society, there were the people who were considered to be the most spiritual and the most highly evolved were typically non-binary people who were classified as hermaphrodites, or what they call dual souls, which identified as both male and female, having both feminine and masculine characteristics, and could move fluidly from what were considered to be, one gender trait to another. So these were considered to be the most highly evolved and the most respected elements in society. Many of them in the Native American communities, they were the shamans, etc. So as society has evolved from primitive communalism through slave-owning societies, through feudalism, through capitalism, you see the older forms of resistance to patriarchy and the development of more freedom for women come more into its own. And because class society was the nature and the foundation of women's oppression, and it always will exist as a component part of class society, we have to eliminate and we have to deal with the principal contradiction, which is the class contradiction. At this stage, the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie in order to truly eradicate women's oppression. And this is why feminism can never prove to be the answer, because feminists eliminate the whole principal contradiction. They don't understand the class basis of women's oppression. They just look at women's oppression as something that men do to women. And to resolve that, we must get rid of men, or we must gain an equal status of exploitation and domination to men, and we must ridicule or persecute men, as opposed to understanding that these conditions are caused by class oppression, and class oppression must be overthrown in order to really create the conditions for true emancipation of women. You follow me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, let me find the final question is, okay, what is the place of antagonism in contradiction?
Is the antagonism is that pretty much what drives the contradiction forward and pushes the qualitative change?
Exactly. Antagonism is the higher stage of contradiction. And it's essential that we understand that all contradictions are not antagonistic. That even like in class society, you have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat exist in contradiction, but not necessarily in antagonism. They do not necessarily wage back and forth physical battles with each other for domination. But the general trend of the relationship, the unity and struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat is non-antagonistic. Although there is a struggle and it is a contradiction. And this is how things exist in general until they reach a stage where one force seeks to so powerfully repress the other that it becomes destructive or antagonistic, and it reaches a qualitatively higher stage, or it eliminates the contradiction altogether. So antagonism is the highest stage of contradiction, and in many cases, the ultimate stage of contradiction is where the contradiction will qualitatively transform into something new, something different, or to a higher stage of contradiction. So the comrades understand the various concepts, the the two world outlooks, the universality of contradiction, the particularity of contradiction, principal contradictions, the principal aspects of a contradiction, and the unity and struggle of contradictions, the place of antagonism in contradiction.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes.
Yep. And continuing to practice with that outlook.
Definitely. And like Marx explained, and we understand this now, is the role of philosophy or philosophers is not just to analyze the world and understand the world, but to change it. And this is what dialectical materialism empowers us to do. So dialectical materialism isn't like other philosophies. We just learn it and then store it in our heads and just use it, when it's convenient or we want to sound high-minded or complicated or mysterious. We sit back and have little back and forth dialogues. The whole essence of dialectical materialism is to have a scientific approach to studying, understanding, and solving problems in the world, in society, etc. So not only must we understand the principles, we must master its application so that we become developed to the point that it becomes second nature to apply it. When we can look at any general condition and we can identify what are the principal contradictions, what is the principal contradiction that gives rise to the very existence of that thing or that phenomenon. And if it's something that I want to change or something I want to raise to another level of development or a new condition, which aspect is the principal aspect in that principal contradiction? And how can I move one or the other aspect in a given direction so that it becomes dominant and I move it to a point where I qualitatively change the whole character of that contradiction and produce a desired result. And this is when we become masters of applying dialectical materialism. There are those of us who are geniuses, and there are those of us who are dialectical materialists. Stalin, as Mao pointed out, was a genius. He was able to draw on a wide range of knowledge and study to solve a lot of problems, but he never fundamentally understood dialectical materialism. Mao was able to solve and confront so many problems fluidly, organically, simply, because he understood how to penetrate to the core, the essence of a given condition, to point out what were the principal contradictions within a given condition and how to move those contradictions so that one principal aspect would develop or move in one direction or the other so that he was able to change that condition and produce a desired result. Applying the theories that we evolved through the study of a thing, understanding the principal contradiction, the principal aspect, etc., and how to move that in a given direction to produce a desired result, and then applying our theory to practice to prove or disprove whether or not our theory is correct so that we produce the result that we're looking for. So it's a whole scientific approach that we have to master understanding and then applying. So studying these articles, the principles of these articles, and how to apply them over and over and over again is going to have to become second nature to us. We can't just pick up these studies or just pick up these terms and concepts and just float them around in our head for a while, then put them down, and then pick them up again when we think about it or somebody brings it to our attention. We have to actually internalize all of these principles and master applying them on a day-to-day, situation, moment-to-moment basis. And that's when we become masters of applying the scientific principles of dialectical materialism to analyze and understanding and solving problems. So do we all understand, these concepts and ideas?
Yep.
Claro.
Yes.
Hey, just in the interest of time, I think we should wrap up by deciding on what we're going to read next, maybe, and then the rest of the logistics we could figure out throughout the week.
All righty. In the interest of time, I think dialectical materialism forms the foundation of any revolutionary study and any revolutionary practice. And this is why I wanted to start everybody else on this. And I want to get everybody thoroughly versed in understanding it. So we've gone through the dialectical materialist theory of knowledge, which was the unity between theory and practice as we studied on practice. Now we have a study and understanding of the concepts of contradiction, which forms the basis of all existence, analyzing and solving problems in the material world, and the basis of understanding the material world. So the next thing I want to do is I want to study a piece that will give us an overall understanding of the concept of dialectical materialism, its evolution, how it came into being the theory of the proletariat, and how it forms the foundation of the philosophy of the revolutionary proletariat and those of us who aspire to bring about revolutionary change in the world. So the next piece I'd like to study is a piece that I wrote. It's in Panther Vision, and I hope all of you have access to it. If not, it's on my website, which is Historical and Dialectical Materialism, the Science of Revolution. So I would like, us to, as the next piece for our study in political education. If anybody doesn't have...
You have 1 minute remaining.
The link to it, the URL to it, if you don't have Panther Vision. And we will work on that for our next study group.
All right. I think everybody has that. Sounds good.
All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up for tonight. Anybody have any comments or questions or anything?
We're all good. All power to the people.
All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up for tonight. I really appreciate you, comrades' participation. All power to the people and Panther love.
All power, y'all. Y'all have a good night.
Thanks.